Welcome to another Texas in Conversation with. So, in this interview, we'll be speaking with my colleague, Jonathan Frankfort. He is Senior Application Specialist at Tecsys, and we're going to discuss emergency relief warehouses. So, in the last few decades, the frequency of disasters have really increased a lot. Weather related, natural disasters, and then things like the factory fires. And now, we're facing the pandemic, so you name it. But no matter what kind of disaster occurs, one thing's certain: supply chain disruption inevitably follows that pandemic or a disaster. It's how your operations are prepared to handle the unpredictable threat that's critical to your supply chain resiliency. And we're going to hear from Jonathan about things that he has done in the past dealing in that environment. So, thank you for joining us today, Jonathan. Before we dive into our conversation about emergency relief, and I have mentioned your title. Tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do at Tecsys, and something about yourself.
Well, hello, Bill, and thank you for having me on today. I'll throw in a little bit on my background. I've been in the warehousing and distribution business for almost all of my plus 30-year career. Frankly, when 9/11 occurred, I had been already consulting in the healthcare space and life sciences, and I was right after 9/11 immediately engaged by a very large municipality to help them with their after action assessment and to help them plan a new network of warehouses for the many scenarios that they could encounter, including mass casualty events. Um, Rapid response events would definitely challenge their day-to-day capacities, their operational and organizational capacities. Prior to joining Tecsys, I had the opportunity to work with emergency management services, EMS, health departments, and many other civilian agencies, as well as commercial warehousing and distribution, primarily in healthcare and life sciences. Since joining Tecsys 11 years ago as a WMS application specialist, I've continued to work with commercial and public enterprises, frequently with a concentration towards emergency preparedness and the warehouse DC supply chain.
This is interesting, Jonathan, because I think the emergency relief or disaster preparedness space is a bit of an unsung hero. Can you tell us what's specifically different about a warehouse or a supply chain that's designed to manage and support emergency relief than a more traditional distributor-based supply chain?
Well, it's important to perhaps consider that emergency relief and disaster preparedness are not always completely separate or separated in a space that's utilized for that purpose. Um, that's a consideration, certainly in a commercial environment, and it has to make economic sense for them. The exception, of course, is the warehouse that is completely dedicated, and usually that's contracted by a governmental institution. Those institutions have very, very specific guidance and requirements. They are dedicated for agencies such as Office of Emergency Management and OEM, um, agency law enforcement frequently engages or has constructs a specific facility. Health departments may. These agencies operate, of course, at the municipal, state, and federal levels. If you're working um, with an emergency in an emergency management warehouse, the compliance to their requirements is absolutely necessary. But as a professional, you're obligated to, of course, provide guidance and recommendations from their perspective, keeping their objectives in mind. The emergency warehouse must be ready for an incredible number of contingencies and events. As I mentioned, even a mass casualty type of events. So there's a lot of consideration a lot of planning that has to go into it. Setups are frequently hybrid, particularly in the commercial types of environments. The specific product is usually set aside and is frequently containerized, kitted, if you will, to enable a rapid response and transport of a product. The containers are often set up for specific types of events. Tracking of expiration dating within those containers is frequently a challenge. Of course, lot numbering for medicinals may be required. The space planning, of course, is very, very important. You will frequently find yourselves in scenarios where kitting and staging um, will occur. And of course, this has to be choreographed, it has to be pre planned. Consider parking space for the folks who are going to come in and work with the emergency. Consider the dock space for the vehicles that will be coming in and out. It might not be possible to reserve floor space, but the plans should be uh, included. And with those plans, you have to think about sufficient power supply, Wi-Fi access, perhaps Ethernet printer connectivity may be needed. Emergency power supply is, of course, essential. It's frequently contracted. A generator is needed, perhaps from with multiple fuel sources, uh, oil and natural gas. It should be the power supply should be should be sufficient for recharging electric material handling equipment, forklifts and such, and even a conveyor system if necessary. You need contingency arrangements for all sorts of weather and seismic events. Your software systems, of course, have to be enabled to switch modes swiftly and efficiently.
Interesting. That's quite a list. Jonathan, it sounds like these preparedness warehouses, they kind of run at two speeds. It seems like they tick along when there's no emergency on the horizon, and then suddenly they fire into top gear, and they're going at a massive pace. What are the guiding principles behind success with a warehouse that's configured to be able to run at those two diametrically opposed paces?
Sure, of course, it's another long list, and no two situations are the same. But there's commonality and there are best practices, and I'll give you the first three and then some after that. The first three: practice, practice, practice. You can get to Carnegie Hall that way, but you can also have a successful emergency warehouse with the sufficient practice. This is really derivative from the arts, if you will, of logistics, and that's derived from military practice and military lessons. Logistics is derived from the science of logistics is derived from military practice. During the times of quiet, as all military knows, what do? You drill, and you drill harder and longer. Operators have to be prepared for their assigned responsibilities at all times. Learn and practice the procedures, the equipment, and the software that's going to be deployed. The employee turnover is, of course, inevitable. Again, this requires more documentation, more practice, more training. Simulate and analyze the results of the training and adjust. And of course, cross training is important. Emergency procedures need to be basic and simple and flexible. KISS, keep it simple. There's not enough time during an emergency event for employees to learn new technologies or equipment if they've never seen it before. Make sure everyone knows their roles and responsibilities. And this includes, of course, supervisors, employees, and yes, executive management need to know and understand what their roles and responsibilities are in the emergency practice. Plan for shortages, disruptions, You will have to deal with disruptions in your human resources, the availability of folks who can't make it to your DC, the availability of material handling equipment that may or may not be functional during the course of your emergency. And of course, products need to be substituted when they don't arrive, aren't available. You want to pre establish communications and your backup channels of communications internally and externally with suppliers and vendors. It's important in these slow times. Stay in touch with the government authorities in your area, including levels of military and law enforcement. Yes, military if you're dealing with equipment that or medicinals that may be attractive to the wrong folks. If multiple municipalities or states, if you're coordinating with multiple municipalities, states, or cities, make sure that they're keeping you in the loop. A lot of times it's not in their general practice. You could fall in the cracks, stay in the loop. It takes all sorts of political and social skills to keep that going. Are you contracted by a government agency? Be sure that you're always remain in strict compliance with their rules and regs. Assure that the initial action, I'm sorry, you may assume that your initial action is going to be round the clock. You need to plan for food services, for bedding for your employees, perhaps hotels in the area, and any other necessities to accommodate a very long, for, to accommodate long nights, long days in a row. Make contingencies for transportation alternatives, for your equipment, for your drivers, even the routes that you would normally use. Those could be disruptive. Plan for it. You need to have alternatives to cellular service, even cellular GPS. Read a map, it'll be helpful. Assure that the physical facility, the plant itself, is secure from natural and even man made intrusion. And of course, needless to say, secure your electronic networks.
Wow. This
It
ability
ain't
to
easy.
react, I'm sure creates some specific approaches to managing a warehouse. I mean, you have to be able to turn on a dime and react to a situation. Can you give us any kind of examples of course, without naming names, client setups or configurations that you've helped our customers with?
Well, the requirements for emergency relief management will be more stringent than normal warehousing, if only because the need for additional controls, your accountability, and probably increased security. Some of our clients have need to restrict physical access to reserved portions of the warehouse holding emergency supplies. In many scenarios, there can be an expectation of incoming donated product. The product might be from vendors, it could be from the general public. It could be quite overwhelming. Truckloads and truckloads come in, hopefully, what you need, sometimes not. Space and other resources must be pre planned to quality control, to QC what comes in. The receiving needs for the receiving needs for the organization need increased inspection. Goods may be donated, as I mentioned, and you're probably looking to cross stock a lot of the goods that are coming in. You want to expedite the deployment of inbound donations. You have to consider that product may need temperature control. Um, it may, especially temperature control in regions where extreme temperatures are prevalent, extreme north, extreme south. Along with that, of course, again, the emergency power requirements need to be considered. If the goods are entered into a system such as a WMS, the system has to be designed to be flexible, but it also has to reliably track the inbound and outbound, and it can't be too burdensome.
Interesting. So, Jonathan, any suggestions for a viewer who's watching this thinking, I don't know if I need that warehouse to manage my next emergency? what would you say to that person as regards how to evaluate and understand whether or not they require an emergency preparedness facility?
Well, I first have to ask who's asking the question. If you're a municipality or some sort of public agency, you're already asking yourself. You're required to ask yourself that kind of question. Recent events have revealed the need to expect the unexpected. We've never seen more of that than in the very recent past. Those events have revealed weather and seismic events, and of course, they've been on everybody's radar for a long time. But the impact of COVID and the related health and social issues have clearly shown a need for a new kind of preparedness for your supply chain as you consider your supply chain. Um, who had considered the lack of preparedness for PPE shortages and other supplies? In the commercial world, you're similarly challenged and you've been left on your own. You are responsible for the safety and security of your employees and customers alike while trying to remain viable. The requirements need to be thought through. The requirements of protecting your and considering your supply chain need to be thought through to minimize impact. A close audit should be done of your supply chain in the context of vulnerabilities to natural and man-made disasters. Your response may be to outsource many aspects of disaster preparedness, but the movement of physical goods, your physical goods, are your responsibility. And those are the goods that generate income for your organization, and it just may be too critical to leave to outside hands. In the final analysis, I think that customers, your competitors, and your internal constituent groups, your management team, your employees, will judge the quality of your company as well as its long-term viability in times of crisis.
Jonathan, thank you very much for your insights today. This has been a very informative Texas in conversation interview. And I think it's also one that's very timely and needs to be taken very seriously. So thank you to our viewers for watching this. And if you'd like to discuss your emergency relief warehousing, Tecsys is here to help, of course. And at the end of this video, you're going to have the option to speak to one of our supply chain experts, perhaps even Jonathan, to talk about your needs and how we can potentially help. And you can also access our ebook on establishing a reliable, robust emergency relief supply chain program. Good luck and see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.